Good evening, everyone. So this is, let me, I'm taller than Wally, so I need to position myself in the camera. This is a case study that I originally presented at the Lift and Escalator Symposium last year, but it talks about a very real risk in the lift industry. It's a case study of how that risk was mitigated, but you sure about that? Being side to side to get the new slide. That's what she said. Yeah. Hang on, got the advance there. There we are. Thank you. So just a bit of background on this. The public switch telephone network, which is the landline network in the UK. So traditionally, this was a copper-based system. That was how it was built out from the 19th century onwards. Goes away in January 2027. Now, I've deliberately put on this slide all of the names this has had before that I've been involved with. So first of all, it was all digital 2020. We didn't get that. Then the deadline was December 2025. We didn't get that. So why do I believe January 2027 now? And the fact of the matter is that the network is starting to collapse in on itself. So they have a huge number of faults being recorded now. Also, they've reached the point in the telecommunications industry where all of the engineers who were trained on maintaining the analog kit have begun to retire. And guess what? None of the new people have been trained on it because we thought it was all going to go away in 2020. So what this has led to is a massive acceleration of the program. So I've been involved with this since 2018. And to begin with, it was fairly slow progress, but they've reached the stage now where, as of last year, they were removing 78,000 copper lines per week. That copper's going away. It's being moved over to fiber. So fiber optic lines. Why is that? Fiber optic lines fundamentally gives you faster internet. And we don't really use landlines anymore for making voice calls because we have mobile phones and all the rest of it. But my goodness, don't we want fast internet everywhere all of the time? That's great. But fundamentally, the auto dialers, so the lift alarms, which are currently deployed in the UK, are by and large analog devices. They were designed with the copper network in mind. In a lot of cases, we used to write specifications in the lift industry which said a copper line shall be run to the lift motor room to serve the auto dialer. With the move away from copper to fiber, we have two big impacts. First of all, the lack of analog signaling. So auto dialers rely on what's called dual tone multi-frequency signaling. DTMF, you would also know this as touch tone. So if you ever hit an automated switchboard, press 1 for accounts, press 2 for sales, etc. A lot of the machine-to-machine communication, which auto dialers are doing, relies on that exact same technology. That is being removed. That's going away because it's seen as no longer a valid use case for the landline network. The bigger concern, and the one that quite frankly terrifies me, is the loss of power resilience. Copper lines carried their own voltage. Copper lines were still there even when the mains power grid fails. Fiber doesn't do that. Fiber often needs multiple points in the building served by mains power. And if any one of those points go, you lose your connection, you lose your telephone line. Previously, that was an extreme event. You needed some idiot to dig up the road and cut through the copper line, and things like direct lightning strikes and so on. With the digital lines, you can trip a breaker in the building and you'll lose that phone line. The big concern is a power failure is a key time for a lift trapping. That lift will stop safely in the shaft, will not necessarily stop at a floor and let you out. So you can have a perfectly good, perfectly compliant auto dialer, but these changes in the line can mean that we introduce this additional risk, and we have a very real risk that at the time when that auto dialer is most needed, it will work, but it's got nowhere to actually dial out to. So the case study we'll look at was the client Premier Inn, so UK's largest hotel chain. I'm so sure many of you have enjoyed their Hospitality, thank you. I'm not sure what I was going to say there. It's a subsidiary of the Whitbread Group. It's headquartered in the UK, but they have operations across not only all of the UK, but Crown dependencies, Isle of Man, Channel Islands, Republic of Ireland, and even into Germany, Austria, and the Middle East now. They have 1,149 passenger carrying lifts across the UK, Republic of Ireland, and the Crown dependencies. Doing work on the Crown dependencies is particularly difficult, which is why I always call it out. Their lift consultancy, Vertica, have been working with them since 2007. It began with lift specification for new sites, moved into the modernisation and replacement projects, and then has gone all the way through model specification and finally now full maintenance, supervision and project management. Beginning in 2018, Vertica began to flag the risk to Premier Inn that all of these 1,100 lifts were going to start to face a problem as the telephone lines were phased out. The communication provider, and when I say communication provider, I mean whoever you are paying your phone bill to. So BT is always the example we use, but it can be a whole variety of organisations. The communication provider at first was quite bullish that they were going to be able to offer a solution. 1,100 telephone lines is a substantial portfolio. Once they got into the complexity of what's actually required for a lift line, they went from being quite bullish to actually, could somebody else take care of it for me, please? Thank you very much. I'll worry about all the internet lines. The key piece here was they were unable to provide a power resilience solution. So they were unable to guarantee the operation of their fibre phone lines in the event of a power failure. Specifically, it was how those backup supplies were going to be managed once they went in. So could they find a battery backup? Yes, you can buy a battery backup off Amazon. Once that's away somewhere in a cupboard with its green light blinking, who's responsible for making sure that when that green light blinks across the red, we all know about it and we all action it? And it's a huge problem. It's a big problem for smaller communication providers. Even the likes of BT have not really been able to come up with a good solution for this. A number of BT customers up in Cumbria paid a not small amount of money for battery backups that were never delivered, just in time for the big storms to hit, knock out all of their overhead power. And for the first time, they lost their telephones as well. Not a great customer experience there. So the key requirements when they were looking for a solution was that reliability, to essentially try where possible to mimic the level of reliability that a copper line used to carry. How that communication was then going to be managed. In the lift industry, the BT is always the boogeyman. BT man did it. Line's been pulled. BT man, BT man. I'm sure you've had responses to many of your reports that are like, nothing wrong with the lift. It was the BT man. So how this was going to be managed was quite interesting because they had always had problems in the portfolio with exactly that. Lines being pulled, lines being reassigned. Telecoms engineer can't work out what the telephone line runs to. Well, that's fine. I'll pull it across and put it in here. Come to service the lift, or we come to inspect the lift. The autodialer doesn't work. The autodialer does work. We just took the telephone line away. There was a desire to work with established providers. This was obviously a very big project for a key client for them. So there was a need to have someone who was established in the market. Where possible, they also wanted to try and control the costs. Not talking too far out of school here, but today in London, if you want to get a lift moved off a telephone line and onto another solution, you are probably talking in the region of £3,000 a lift. I might be underbaking that. Don't quote me if a lift contractor quotes your client something different. And then it was about the project delivery. This is a large portfolio. It's not such a complex portfolio, but there are multiple maintainers involved, multiple lift contractors involved. So the actual project delivery piece was key as well. So when a paper was written and various recommendations were made, but the key recommendation that was made was a service which my company MEMCO provide called Sentinel. And the way in which we met the different project requirements was, first of all, on the reliability front, all of the lifts would be moved off the landlines and onto a mobile gateway. So we're now going to communicate through the mobile phone network. First and foremost, that was a 4G, what is called VoLTE, which is voice over LTE. LTE is the telecommunications actual description for 4G. Amusingly, it means latest technology evolution. Someone didn't think ahead when they named that. That said, why 4G? 4G has the best coverage and the best longevity at the moment in the UK. 5G still struggles to penetrate into buildings and fundamentally doesn't have the coverage. We've already lost 3G, we're about to lose 2G. 4G is the best bet at the moment. Obviously, as soon as you move into the mobile network, signal is everyone's concern. That 4G gateway gets what's called a non-steered roaming SIM card. Now, what that means is that SIM will roam across all UK networks, regardless of provider. A lot of roaming SIMs that you will get are still steered, which means they will connect to their parent as a preference over others. So even if the parent is quite a weak signal, they will still reach out and try and grab onto that, whereas there might be a competitor's mast literally on the building itself, but it won't connect to that. So a non-steered roaming SIM card was used. The big point was all of these gateways have an onboard battery backup, which can be monitored. So the battery backup provides 4 hours of operation after a mains power fail, so over and above the 1 hour required for auto dialers. But the point is that battery can be remotely monitored and understood for its status. As well as that, the gateway supports the analog signaling and the analog to digital conversion that will be needed long term. So that meant that the actual auto dialers on the lifts themselves didn't have to be changed out. So we could leave that kit in place and we could just displace the landlines. For the management, monitored via an online platform, and that's looking at 3 things. Battery status, as I alluded to, mains power. Ultimately, if the building has a mains power fail, there's not a lot we can do, but we can let the building know that's happened because it's entirely possible it's a localized power fail just to the lift itself. Once we issue that alert, it usually comes with the comment, do you by any chance have an electrician working in the building? And lastly, signal. Signal is always the concern with the mobile phone network. We can monitor for what we would call signal dips, and we can also, if we see signal become problematic, we can force the gateway to do things like rescans and so on. Battery changes every 3 years were included as part of the service or as needed. The batteries have a 3-year lifetime. If they've been on a particularly harsh recharge cycle, if they've been exposed to extremes of temperature and so on, it can shorten that. And all of this was tied up as a digital audit trail for all of the lift connections. So for the first time, the client could see across their whole base what's actually going on with the individual connections. Established provider, I wouldn't be up here talking about it if they hadn't chosen an established provider. MEMCO's been in business since the early 70s. We're well established in the lift industry. Most people would know us either from our legacy product range of light curtains on the lift doors, but more in the last 30 years for our range of open protocol auto dialers. And given none of my competitors are here, I'm going to say that I'm the biggest manufacturer of open protocol dialers because there's no one here to argue with me. Fixed costs, the service is provided as a flat monthly fee to the end client. So just like they were paying a set amount for their landlines, they pay a set amount for this service. There was no upfront costs, and we worked with the lift contractors directly to actually handle installation and so on. We also free issued all of the equipment. This was estimated to realize a 25% cost saving versus if they had just switched across straight to a digital line solution. Because the other thing which the communication providers don't necessarily tell you is when they take your analog line away that you might be paying £10 a month for, don't think you're going to be paying £10 a month for your new all singing, all dancing fibre connection that you didn't ask for, because those are coming in at, if you're doing really well on big commercial contracts, maybe £30, probably more like over 50. Anyone that's made that switch in their own home has certainly felt that pain. I know I did dealing with Vodafone. Project delivery, we set a very clear installation specification to ensure consistency across sites. I've worked with mobile gateways for a long time. I hate to see them mounted on top of a lift car. I like them in the top of a lift shaft. I like them behind an MRL panel. I like them in a motor room. I don't like them on top of a lift. And I have had conversations with lift engineers in the past where they've got it on top of the lift and they go, I don't know why it doesn't work. And I go, is your mobile phone working? And they go, of course not, we're underground. Still the mobile network, chap. We also use the incumbent lift maintenance contractors. So rather than look at a subcontractor model, we use the people who were maintaining the lifts. So there's some very obvious process pieces. They already understood building access. They had risk assessments in place and so on. But they also understood the quirks of these different lifts. And in some cases, were actually a very good source of information about problems on site and so on. So the deployment, 1,149 passenger lifts across 570 sites and 4 territories. When we went into this, we thought it was only going to be 1 territory. And then we had to have a conversation about the fact the Republic of Ireland is indeed another country, as are the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. We put a single asset register in place. This covered all of the passenger lifts, but also the platforms as well. Platforms were dealt with on a case-by-case basis, as a number of platform lifts fall under the machinery directive, so technically don't need an auto dialer. There were also a number which were supervised operation only, but there were some which had been installed and were in other parts of the hotel where it was actually felt that having an auto dialer in place and having a connection in place was the right answer. We agreed rate cards with the incumbent lift maintenance contractors. So this was for the installation, where typically we saw they used dedicated repairs team or service teams. Training was provided as required. The installation specification, as I alluded to, made it clear that that gateway had to be installed in the motor room, or in the case of motor room lift installations, at the top of the lift shaft or within the panel if there was space allowing. The other big piece was to make sure these gateways went onto a dedicated mains power supply that was isolated only by the main breaker. I have a slide later explaining why that's important. Once new connections went in, we placed them into what we call our 7-day check. So that means that from it going in, we are looking at 7 days of consistent mobile signal and consistent stable power. Any issues we were able to flag, and remedial work be carried out. In some instances, we did call people as they were getting in the van leaving site and said, right, stop, turn around, go back, do it again. So what were the challenges? A project of this side is always going to have challenges. The majority of the failed 7-day checks were indeed for mains power issues. So what we were finding was engineers were connecting into mains supplies that they believed were only switched with the main breaker. It was actually switched with the lift shaft lighting. And what's the first thing you do? You switch the shaft lights on. What's the last thing you do? You switch the shaft lights off. And in between that, you can meter that supply all you want, and it'll tell you it's there. But this was a key catch. We identified certain models of lift where they were consistently making this mistake because it looked like it was a stable main supply. And we did establish ways of working that said, once you're on a stable supply, do me a favor and just flick the shaft lights on and off to see if you lose it. Signal was the other piece. So Heathrow Terminal 4, we'd had a nice picture of that site. There's the hotel. Great. Could not get mobile phone signal for love nor money. Went to site, and you understand that that picture has been cropped in. There is a giant radar tower just on the other side of the road. So sort of stood in the car park going, well, think we can see what might be causing the interference here. We solved this by actually using directional mobile phone antennas. So whereas we would normally use what's called an omnidirectional antenna, so it can reach out and see all of the mobile phone towers around it, we used a directional one and faced it away from that, what's called, I've learned quite a lot, airport radar, airport surveillance radar, to make sure that its field of view was narrowed and it was only looking away from that, which solves the issue. Unsurprisingly, Heathrow Airport did not respond to our questions about their radar towers. The Canary Wharf site, again, I spent quite a lot of time at this building. It's a 26-story building where inexplicably, or we thought inexplicably, there was no mobile phone signal above the ground floor. So where we want to work at the top of the building, we just could not get any mobile phone signal. The hotel is right next to a DLR station. We thought that might be a cause of some interference. But actually, when you go on Google Street View and have a good click around, there's a giant building on the other side of the road, which once you click on it, tells you that it's a Metropolitan Police evidence storage warehouse. And it looks like they've got a bunch of exciting stuff on the roof that they also won't tell you what it does. But I did think it was interesting. We didn't have any mobile phone signal. We went with a very simple but very time-consuming solution here. We put the gateway on the ground floor, and then we cabled back up that lift shaft 26 stories to reach the panel. We didn't do that on every site, obviously, but on these challenging sites, we went with these more extreme solutions. So additional insights and ways of working that we pulled out of this, whilst there was a very good asset register for the lifts themselves, there was no real asset register for the telephone lines. So you couldn't get individual telephone numbers for individual lifts easily. What we did then was that the lift engineers went round, we said, before you start pulling things out, plug into it and get that phone number back, because we could pass that to the client, because they obviously had to cancel off all of these landlines. Tracking call activity was an interesting one as well. Once we put the gateway on, we could see calls going through the gateway. So there were a couple where we put the gateway in. Is everything okay with the gateway? Yes, it is. However, the auto dialer on the other side places a call every minute. You might want to go and see if it's all right. I don't think it is. I also think I'm probably quite unpopular with hotel staff who had claimed they were testing the auto dialer every week, and we had to say, there's no call activity on this one. Also, it was interesting when we got into conversations with the lift contractors about the auto dialer itself versus the gateway. And I think this is where there's been a lot of, over the years, kind of finger pointing going, well, it's the line, not the auto dialer. We came up with clear ways of working and what we would call perimeters of responsibility, so that it was very clear that if there was a problem with the gateway, client came to us. But if it was a problem with the auto dialer, that then needed to go to the lift company. But we could also have a back and forth with them to explain what we were seeing in terms of behavior of the auto dialer. Clear escalation process on faults when it couldn't be rectified, and also things like authorizing a process for going to site and so on. So this project was delivered across nearly all of the sites and nearly all of the lifts. If anyone would like to go to the Channel Islands and install some GSMs for me, let me know afterwards. Well, be careful, Vince.
We're doing the remote monitoring project. I'm project managing a remote monitoring project.
Yes.
You know, do you?
I do know, yes. We should still talk afterwards. So this is now proactively monitored across their entire estate. All batteries are monitored and are tracked for life cycle. Fault resolutions, we coordinate the majority with the lift contractors, and it also ensures that only qualified personnel are going to site to work on anything. The monitoring data is also now used as part of the maintenance surveillance program with Premier Inn. So where we've identified that either work needs doing on gateways, is it being done, but where we can also identify a faulty auto dialer, that's now being brought up as well. And certainly any insurance defects that come up immediately land in our lap. Thank you very much.
Anybody got any questions on that? There's none online at the moment, but probably got one. So you mentioned about insurance defects.
Yep.
Are you seeing any, are the defects that you're seeing, are they being reported consistently, or is there differences in the way that they're being reported?
So I think it's a difficult one, really. Ultimately the defect is reported as an auto dialer defect. So part of the back and forth we have to have with Vertica is to say, okay, it's been reported as an auto dialer defect. What data can we see in the platform related to the gateway? So the connection. If we can't see a fault with that, then it genuinely is the auto dialer. And it's really difficult because you're technically speaking, when you drill down into all of this, the connection is outside the scope of the lift regulations. It's outside of the scope of British standards. but it is increasingly important, and it is increasingly a source of these failures. Yeah, unrelated to this client, but I went to a residential development in London where the site manager somewhat naively said to me, "It's the weirdest thing, all 42 autodialers stopped working." I said to him, "That doesn't happen. Let's go around and do a few tests." And sure enough, they were dialing out. And I said, "Well, take me through the history of the site." And he said, "Oh yeah, it's just changed hands." I said, "Well, yeah, because you've changed hands, you've triggered that." So look, it is difficult. And I think, ultimately you stood in the lift, you press the button, it doesn't ring out. But anything that can come back with a little bit of detail on these reports, specifically if once you've pressed the button, can hear a ringing, that usually means that the autodialer itself is working. It just hasn't got a phone line on the other side of it.
Just to touch on what Dom said,
Yep.
in terms of sort of how they categorise these defects, is there a difference across? I don't want you to name names, obviously, but do you see a difference?
So in terms of the category, the categorization has changed over the last year or so, but it's been pretty consistent. I think it is, individual report to individual report, but how much detail comes with it sometimes changes. Is my diplomatic answer.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're here talking about lifts, but this is a far bigger problem than lifts.
Oh,
I live in an area of the country where we're not even in a rollout of getting fibre yet. And I live between Peterborough and Leicester, so I'm not exactly in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, people with home alarms are still getting sold product that won't work.
So
people with elderly generation are getting hammered by it.
So I went to do testing at BT, probably would have been late 2021, I think. And we were set up in their lab testing our equipment, so our auto dialers, and a guy came in and opened his notebook and went, "Where are you from?" I went, "Lift industry." And he wrote lift industry at the top of the page. And he went, "Right, talk to me about that." At the time, I think we were the 600th or thereabouts application they'd identified as being served by copper lines that they didn't have a solution for, including some equipment which BT manufactured themselves. But telecare, it's a huge issue for the telecare alarm industry. There's some even kind of scarier stuff like level crossings on the railways. I'm passionate about the lifts, but let's get the level crossings sorted out as well, yeah. And then some really odd things that you don't think about, like a lot of little telemetry devices. So one that was brought up with us was sewage pumps, which is something that happily sits there pumping away, but you want to know when it stops because your brand new housing estate is suddenly going to look a lot less attractive. And again, it's a little telemetry device that was designed to just sit on a copper line, just ping a few tones every now and again to say, "Yes, I'm here," whatever it looks like. All of this is going to be a problem. And, through the Lift and Escalator Industry Association, we've engaged on this. We've been told, and others have been told, you're not critical national infrastructure. I still don't know what is, but I know I'm not. And therefore, it's an industry-led program. You need to go and find your own solutions to it. So, yes, certainly I've presented with telecare industry, the fire alarm industry, security alarm industry. They all have the same problems.
The village I live in the last 2 years, last 3 years, it's had the copper line, a mile's worth of copper line stolen twice.
Yep.
And at the last time it went, we were 6 weeks without phones because BT or Openreach do not stock copper anymore.
Yep.
So they'd order it. It's 6 weeks with the whole village.
And the other dangerous piece on this is you may not have fibre all the way to the premises, but you may have fibre up to the cabinet, which in itself can cause problems. So, yeah, a lot of people think, well, I've not had someone come in and running fibre into my dwelling or into my premises, but you may well have had somebody sit in the street and make changes that you don't know about.
Well, BT didn't even know they wanted to exchange.
Yeah. I hate to say it, I'm surprised by none of what you're telling me. Yes.
Regarding the monitoring of the battery backups,
Yes.
do you allow the lift companies to get view of that, or do you monitor it and then tell lift companies who takes ownership on that side?
Okay. I'm sorry, I see a colleague laughing at the back of the room. Can the lift companies view it? Yes, they can. And the lift companies responsible for it? No, they're not. We are. So yeah, we're very clear. At installation, if you've not plugged the battery in, go back and plug it in. But also, if we start to see that it's had harsh mains power cycling and the battery won't hold its charge, that's on us. We will then flag that, and we will flag to the lift company we need a battery change, and we'll free issue that. Yes, the lift companies have access to all of the data. I'll leave it there.
Thank you.